Hiya folks, it's Kikoskia here and welcome back to Writing and Me. This video contains no gameplay or music whatsoever, allowing you to focus on whatever it is you're up to, whether it's reading, writing, editing, listening to music, playing games, working, or cheating in a choose-your-own-adventure game book. Don't look so surprised, I know what you're up to. You've put your finger on that page to make sure that you can go back to it just in case you make the wrong decision. And I know this because I did it with every single one of them as well. There were some of them that were very sneaky and would present choices that are impossible for you to get in normal play, and when you turned to them, the game called you out for being a cheater. Those were quite rare, however. I only really saw them in the Mario ones. There were quite a few of them. Don't feel bad about doing that. The important thing is that you're having fun reading the book. As long as you're having fun, that's all that matters. It's not like there's an official board of choose-your-own-adventure game readers who are going to come to your house and get really angry that you're cheating. Or is there? No, there isn't. There actually isn't. But there could be. But there isn't. With that said, let's talk about today's topic. Last time we talked about the beginning of a book, and the beginning of the book is very important for obvious reasons. This time, we're going to go to the other end of the book and talk about the ending, and why that is important, besides the obvious. But what comprises the ending of a book? Every book ends differently, but overall, they all seek to achieve the same thing, and that is to provide closure for the reader. You want the reader to finish the book and go, "Ah, that was a good ending. It cleared up lots of things for me, and I'm satisfied." If you have that, you have the makings of a good ending. But what gives people that satisfaction, that feeling that the ending was good? The answer depends very much on the story you're trying to tell. So let's look in more detail as to what comprises an ending. The ultimate objective is to provide that closure, and that closure typically comes through the conclusion of the main arc of the story. There'll be many stories and threads that weave their way through the narrative of the book, but there is a main one, a main problem, something that needs to be overcome for the story to be done. The main characters may not know about this at the very beginning, but they do very quickly figure out what is going on, unless it's a mystery story, in which case they feel that something is off and then they start investigating. They could very well only figure out what's actually going on at the very end by piecing together all the clues that they've accumulated, but I digress. Ultimately, you are to conclude that main arc, and that conclusion doesn't have to be a happy one. I've heard more than once from people that they don't want to read a story that doesn't have a super happy ending. If it's a downer ending, or one where not everything is cheery, they don't want to know. But unfortunately, that is not how life works, and more often than not, it is not how things work in a story either. Sure, most of the things in the story may end happily, but not everything will. A character may have lost a loved one who isn't going to come back. They may have got the revenge they were seeking, but their loved one is still gone. Some villains are going to manage to achieve their schemes and get away with it, providing some good fodder for sequels, I might add, but not everyone is going to get their just desserts. And then there are events that the characters don't have an impact on. They may be trying to stop a war in the Eastern Kingdoms, but far across the sea in the Western lands, there could be another conflict going on. But they're more bits of world building than they are plots in the story. The next question is, how do you make the ending a good one? Providing closure is one thing, but how do you make that closure satisfying? The answer to that comes from a story that came before it. You have to look at your narrative, you have to look at the direction the story is going, and from that you will be able to see what ending is going to happen. There's nothing worse than reading a story and finding out that the ending that was meant to happen isn't the one that does, because the author is determined to make sure that something happens no matter what. Suddenly, the narrative goes completely out the window and onto a tangent that doesn't make any sense. It can really break your immersion. It can ruin a story. It's very important to make sure the ending fits and is right, because a bad ending can sour the reader's view of the entire book that they've read, and it can really kill their interest for the series if there's more than one of them. try to resist the urge to change things drastically from where the story is going, even if it's not a direction you originally anticipated. I've stated before that quite often the plot will change as you're writing it, and things will occur that you hadn't expected. This will impact the ending of the book, and you need to be firm in sticking with the ending that works the best. Even if bad things happen to the main character, even if there are sad tones to the ending, you have to go with that because it is the ending that was made for the story. It is the ending that fits the best, and thus it is the ending most well suited to give that closure. But how much closure do you need to give? This is a very interesting question, because depending upon who you ask, you will get different answers. Some people like a story to be absolutely tied up completely. They want there to be no mystery whatsoever, and for everything to be laid plain before them at the very end. Then there are people that love having lots of mysteries and things unexplained. People that will spend ages after reading a book trying to come up with answers to questions that the book presents to them. Ultimately, the answer to how much closure you want to give depends a lot on two things. The first being, what genre are you writing for? Because if you are writing a murder mystery or a crime book, you want to close a lot of the loose ends up. You want to provide answers. You don't have to provide answers to absolutely everything, but all of the key things you do want to have revealed. You at the very least want to be able to see and visualize the events that led up to the murder or the crime. You want to be able to know where all the key characters are and what they're doing. You want to be able to know the motives and who knew whom and why X hated Y and why Y decided to murder Z. You want all of these answers so that the person can put the book down and go, "Oh, so that's how it all happened. It all makes sense. I thought to begin with that it was Q that murdered Z, but clearly with all the evidence before me, that is wrong." I'm sure there are murder mystery stories where the person who ultimately did the crime doesn't get the justice they deserve, but more often than not, the person trying to figure out the case at least has an idea as to who did it. A pretty firm idea, even if they can't prove it. As for stories that don't need that absolute level of closure, what you decide to conclude plot-wise depends on what things are most important to conclude for the ending, and also if you're going to be writing more than one book. If you're writing more than one book, if you're even thinking that maybe you might have a sequel, it's quite important to not tie everything up, because if everything is neatly tied up in a bow, you're going to struggle to link the next story up with the original one. Usually, the stories are tied up by having the main plot actually take multiple stories, but they provide the closure by having big climactic confrontations at the end of each book. It could be a battle where the hero doesn't manage to defeat the villain, but is able to stop their nefarious scheme and drive them away, or they discover one of the villain's allies working in an organization to undermine it, and they're able to stop that person. Little victories that slowly build up and provide that closure, while the main villain, the big problem, still remains at large, and likely becomes an even more dangerous threat as time goes on. Again, this ending doesn't necessarily have to be an all-round good one. Sometimes, at the end of a book in a series, the villain will achieve a great victory, and this victory will change the direction of the story. It is important, I hasten to add, to think about giving the main characters some small victory while the villains get a big gain, just so that there is that glimmer of hope. That way, there's something to drive the reader to go to the next book. If it's nothing but despair and misery and loss, quite often the reader is going to be less inclined to go to the next one, because they'll feel that all there'll be in the next book is even more misery and loss and defeat, because there isn't that glimmer of hope to cling on to. There isn't that, well, The villain may have been able to activate the Eternity Sphere and thus set in motion events that will end the universe, but they did manage to steal a piece of the Eternity Sphere after it was activated. And with this piece of the Eternity Sphere, they can try and figure out how it works and maybe come up with a way to undo the magic that will unmake the universe. There is that glimmer right there of, well, the villains are well on their way to winning, but maybe we can snatch victory from the jaws of their victory and make their victory a defeat. There is another reason to not want to tie up all the loose ends, however, and it is simply that you don't know how to tie up that loose end just yet. You came up with an idea, and while you're working through a story, you hoped that it would become more clear in your mind, and you find out when you get to the final chapters that it actually hasn't. You really like this idea, though. This idea you feel is going to take shape at some point, but not in this book. If you're planning on writing sequels, you can leave something a mystery, provided that it is a believable mystery, and answer them later on. The mystery doesn't even have to necessarily be tied into the main arc, because the world is huge, and all kinds of things are going on at the same time, and you can afford to have one or two things hanging there as enigmas waiting to be solved, things that may entice a reader to go and read the next one, especially if it's tied to a character that they really like. What is the mystery that Gerald the Guard is keeping from the rest of the group? Is it that he is secretly working with the enemy? Is it that he has a mysterious, shady past? You're not sure. There is definitely something going on there. It hasn't been revealed at the end of a story, so clearly it must be important for something later on, the reader thinks. And so they go and grab the next book because they really like Gerald the Guard. They hope that it's not something terrible. They want to know what's going to happen. That is a loose end that you haven't tied up, and you have provided as a hook to drag someone into the next story. A little thing to tempt them on. That hook is very important. And that hook is something that you want to build in, not just into the mystery things that you haven't yet concluded, but also into that main arc that you're carrying on into a sequel, if you're going to write a sequel. If you're not going to write a sequel, you have to worry less about hooks, but I wouldn't eliminate them entirely. I would leave one or two tiny little things there, because you may change your mind later. You may decide, you know what, I actually want to return to this story. But I finished everything. Oh wait, I didn't finish everything. There's still this, and there's still that, and I had ideas for this, and I can work with that. You've left yourself breadcrumbs that you can follow into a new story. The hooks and breadcrumbs aren't always necessarily for the reader. Sometimes they're for you, to help you out later. And trust me, if you leave good ones, you'll be thanking past you, because that ending has just led to a new beginning. And that's the main thing that the ending should do. The ending should allow the reader, if they end up not reading any of the other books in the series, or if that is the only book, the ending should be able to provide a platform whereupon the reader can imagine how the world carries on without the narrative. You leave the story in a position where they can picture the future themselves. That future isn't going to be exactly the same in the minds of every single person, because every single person is different and they will have a different opinion on how things go, but the ending should be such that they can easily imagine this and they can easily talk about this future. And sometimes you have people who will take a future that wasn't written and they'll write it themselves, and you'll end up with people writing fanfiction that follows on from stories. And whenever that happens, you know that you've made a good ending that has left a huge impact on people, and that you've also made a world that people want to continue. The good ending makes people want more, even if it's also meant to provide closure and answer questions that were asked in the narrative. Now, I know what you're thinking. You've been saying for quite a while here, Kiko, that the ending needs to provide closure, and it needs to be satisfying, and it needs to settle all of the things that need to be answered in the narrative. But now you're saying that you should leave mysteries in there, that you should provide hooks to get people to want more. Surely you can't have the ending both settle everything and leave them hungry for more. But you can. They may seem contradictory, but they're actually not. They work very well in tandem together. And a good story has you both happy with the ending and asking questions about what happens afterwards. Those things of, but what about this and what about that? That's where sequels are made, and that's also where conversation about a story is made as people discuss it. And you know you've done it right when people are asking you questions about stuff that hasn't happened, stuff that you probably haven't thought of, things that may very well be the seed in your mind for a sequel that you never thought would come to be. And so in conclusion, what is an ending? It's something that provides closure. It's something that concludes some aspect of the main arc of the story. It doesn't have to be a good ending, though you do need that thing to spur people on. That thing could be a mystery that's not answered. It could be that glimmer of hope in a very dark and bleak ending. Or it could be the fact that the villain still remains at large. Your ending will conclude many tales and start a few others. But whether it is the end or a to be continued, it will provide that closure, that satisfying feeling of, that was a good read, and then a pause, and then thinking, I wonder if there's another one. And with that, we have talked about the ending of a story. But what is to come after this? We have talked about many things after all, but there are still many more things to discuss. And so, when we come back, another topic about writing and me. Or maybe a different topic, like me talking about DMing and me. Me talking about my various stints as a dungeon master or a player in tabletop role-playing. If you want to hear about that, let me know. If you have a topic about writing that you want me to discuss, let me know. If you want me to talk about the Threnody of Dusseldom, let me know. By the way, Chapter 3 of the Threnody of Dusseldom is available. You can check it out at kikoskia.com/writing/Dusseldom, spelled DUSTLEDOM. And so, I'll catch you next time, folks, and I'll see you then. Later.